Dan, thank you so much for joining us here at the PLSA's Investment Conference. We're surrounded by professionals working in an environment at the moment that's pretty tricky waters to navigate in the finance world. What can history teach them, and how intrinsically linked is economy and history?
Big questions there. I think one thing history can teach us is we're unlikely to see a return to normality anytime soon. Big questions have been raised. There have been big discontinuities, and I can't see how quickly they're going to be put back together. And therefore, I think that uncertainty is going to remain. We've got the rise of populism throughout Europe: Poland, Hungary, Italy, Austria, arguably the UK. We saw a bit of France as well, Holland. So Germany now. So I think populism, it's going to be hard. Where that energy goes remains to be seen. The USA, obviously, now recently Donald Trump talking about trade war, which is the ultimate discontinuity and cause instability. So I'm afraid that history suggests we're in a period of instability. I think in terms of the economy and history, well, Marxists obviously believe that everything is dependent on the economy, and I think the Marxist analysis of history is quite robust. It's quite good. I mean, if people are suffering economically, they start looking to extremes. They start looking for solutions outside the mainstream. They turn to different political parties. Of the Great Depression in America, there's all sorts of interesting studies about political parties at state level, provincial level in Canada, that would be in power for decades as a result of the shift that followed the Great Depression. If people if they're suffering, if their kids are unemployed, if they can't afford rent, if they can't afford food, then they're going to look for radical solutions. They're going to look towards politicians going, do you know what? It's very straightforward. You've been lied to by the elite. You've been lied to by the political class. I'm coming along, let's not forget exactly what Donald Trump said. I've got solutions that we are going to get this done. And it's not going to be painful, because actually it's going to be very simple. Mexico's going to build the wall. We're going to get millionaires paying their tax, which is what he said. And so I think the economy is hugely important. When houses are underwater, when people are feeling insecure, there is going to be political instability.
And Brexit is on the horizon, perhaps as a result too.
Yeah, and I think Brexit was a response to the global economic dislocation of 2008 and onwards, but it was also a response to big challenges around migration in Eastern and Southern Europe. We had our televisions every night. We saw boatloads of people coming across, landing on the shores of Europe. What's going to happen to these people? That was a cause of great concern. And then we all know it's this idea of the multinational, globalized elite. People like me able to go to university in the States, sending their kids here and having enjoying the opportunities of this globalized world. And people who are not able to do that feel pretty pissed off with it, and what they see is a lack of good jobs for life, like the ones that they would have expected to do when they left school. So the gig economy, a globalised world, competing against the South Koreans, those can be scary things.
So in light of all of that, what would you say to an industry like this, who are navigating those waters, dealing with Brexit, about what happens next and what they do to look to the future and what to expect and how to mitigate?
Well, I mean, that's the $1 million question, and of course historians terribly always go, well, I don't know, I'm not very good at predicting the future. What I think, a couple of things you can say in the sort of British perspective is we are going to have we're unlikely to get a Brexit separation deal which is wildly popular. It will be a messy compromise, and therefore it will be kind of unpopular with everyone, which sometimes is what a good deal should be. A good compromise, you guys are always making deals. Both sides should feel kind of annoyed at the outcome. In that case, that's probably a decent deal. But it's not. That's not an easy deal to sell to the population. A big chunk of whom were promised utopian results. This is going to be great. You're going to get your old passports back. You're going to have no hassles. All the best bits about the old time will be there, but we're going to have lots of good new stuff as well. So there is an opening there which populists are going to gallop through. So there is going to be continued debate, disappointment, and I would argue probably instability within the UK. And then we've also got a kind of a troubled international picture at the moment. But the $1 million question is whether the Chinese in the South China Sea, the Koreans, the Russians, the Iranians, and the Americans, are they serious about stoking up these traditional these rivalries, or is it domestic political posture? To what extent do the sane people in Beijing, Washington, and elsewhere understand that by what we've done in constructing this globalised economy is one of the most remarkable achievements in the history of the world. We've reduced national difference, national regulation. We've created unimaginable economic wealth. And is that going to be obvious enough to people in the important capitals of the world to make them back down from old-fashioned mercantilist trade policies or even old-fashioned ideas about war?
In light of that global picture, you talked about it when you just did your speech on stage. Retreating behind the castle walls, as you put it, is a precarious place to put yourself in splendid isolation, I think you called it. History shows us that's not been a great...
Well, it doesn't work really, because the idea of sovereignty is a really nice idea, but it's quite a relatively recent idea. The idea that a nation state is sovereign and it can be completely in command of its own self is actually just a piece of philosophy. Everyone in the medieval world realised that wasn't true. Ideas flowed from city to city, state to state. Disease flowed, the plague. You could be England, but when those ships arrive from the continent, plague rips through England and kills between a third and a half of the population in a couple of years. So there is this idea that you can kind of construct these iron-bound states and have total control about what happens within them is a kind of 19th century idea, and it existed at a time in history. But we now know that just simply isn't true anymore. And we've got people with Apple iPhones using Uber and dating apps and ordering food online. Those things are actually often outside the control of our governments to regulate, or governments are really having to catch up. Whether it's data online, internet search, whatever it might be, social networking. So this idea about sovereignty feels a bit old-fashioned to me, and we need to change and realise. So by existing in a world in which we're constantly kind of pooling bits of sovereignty here and there, we kind of need to be realistic that we're never going to go. Even if there was a time when we could just pull up the drawbridge, stick the Royal Navy in the Channel, and hope that we could protect our way of life, those days are kind of gone. And actually, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that system did also provide a huge amount of friction and potential for conflict. Because if you've got the French doing one thing completely different from the Dutch doing it here and the Brits doing it there, then obviously there's going to be that divergence and that need for them to protect their bits from foreign intervention can lead to conflict. And
it's kind of ignoring what's created the rich tapestry that is Britain now, isn't it?
It's what's created the rich tapestry, which is Western economies, which is, we've lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in the world, in East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and in the West as well, in the last few generations. We've done something completely extraordinary. And this is why populists annoy me in particular because they like to claim the present is an atrophied version of the past. The present is a poor and diminished version. We live in the most extraordinary times, and I think that the negativity is really, really dangerous, because unless you salute the achievements that we've made and understand where they've come from, then you're in danger of those outmoded ways of thinking.
In terms of being positive, as you suggested there, this industry have talked a lot this week at this conference and generally about what an influence they could have in terms of things like impact investing, and how actually this could be a force for good. Finance hasn't sort of had the best headlines in the past 10 years, but could that change? Could reputationally that change, because they can be the good guys, if you like?
Well, that's an interesting point, isn't it? I think something's happening here, which is our politics in the West is I use this term very hesitantly, but there does seem to be a bit of a crisis of political leadership in terms of people respecting and believing that politics is a way of solving problems. And people are looking at Elon Musk, billionaires, charities, crowdfunding projects around the world, social media innovation. People think that has the capacity to change the world, and sometimes they're right. So, if we look at cleaning up the world's oceans, for me it doesn't appear to be state actors that are taking the lead on that. It appears to be all these rather interesting people coming together, innovators, a very kind of international mix of largely non-political bodies doing that. And I think that whether it's impact investing, creating facts on the ground that politicians then have to sort of accede to, and actually it's what's always happened. I think politicians have lied to us the last 100 years and pretended they're more powerful than they are. But if you look at the big innovations, whether it's the coming of electricity, the motor car, the human rights. Those things came from outside professional politicians. And if you go up to a professional politician now and say, what are you going to do about the self-driving car or the human carrying drone? They look at you like they're just like, I mean, we're basically trying to get through the next week. So, but the people that are working on these projects, the people that are finding out ways to transport us all by drone in the next 20 years are people that are laying the... And Tony Blair, when he left Downing Street, someone said, what advice do you have for young people to want to change the world? And he famously said, become a scientist, don't become a politician. He left that experience very jaundiced. So I think in terms of your industry, I think impact investing, identifying projects that can be fixed with smart investing and support is potentially very exciting.
So if the people that were here listening to you speak today take away one thing that you said or one nugget from history, what would you hope it would be?
Well, I hope that if people here take away one thing, it's that what happens in Europe affects us here on this island, on these islands, whether we like it or not. Plague, Protestantism, physics, pensions have all come from Europe to here, and there's been nothing we can do about that. And so we have a choice of trying to gain influence in Europe and try and shape those innovations they happen there, or of pulling up the drawbridge and hoping somehow that we can deal with them when they arrive.
Dan Snow, thank you so much for joining us. Fascinating to hear your insights.